Lately, I've been feeling like I have a problem with my posture. Anyone else feeling that way? Y'all better be raising your hands because in 2026 America, I think we've all got a problem with our posture. Maybe I should say it differently. Maybe I should say our stance. Lately I've had quite a few people ask me when I talk about being stressed, when I mention feeling heavy or tired, they have asked me, where do you feel that in your body? And I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that since adulthood, or maybe even earlier, since my whole life, it's really always been the same answer. The answer is here, along the band of my shoulders and across the neck. Anyone else? It all collects right there. The weight of the world lands right there, and I begin to hunch forward. It was already bad, and then along came smartphones. As parents, we roll our eyes when our children tell us they are bored of standing in line, or they are bored from waiting for a table, but how often are we adults allowing ourselves to be bored anymore? How often are we studying something in our far view, wondering about the stars or the cloud formations or just daydreaming? That's not what we're doing anymore. There's a whole new series of words and a new language for what we are doing now. What is it? Scrolling, zooming, whatever. And it's pulling our necks in which direction? Down. Then there is this authoritarian administration and the millionaires and billionaires who benefit from it. And since 2016, I think it's been a constant game of nightmare limbo where the refrain keeps asking us, how low can we go? And then on the morning of Tuesday, April 7th, the longest day in recent memory, the President of the United States publicly stated that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. And when that happened, we were all plunged down with him into the depths of his own personal hell. Now, I don't know about you, but I have tired of looking downward, bending over just to see how deep is the moral chasm that is pulling the highest office in the land downward. Enough is enough. This entire administration, all of them, the lowest of the low, and the acts of stupidity and toxic patriarchy and male supremacy and white supremacy and blatant despoilation of the earth and human indecency and brazen criminality, well, it all just makes being an American feel like suffering a daily indignity. Yes. Does it not? But at the beginning of this month of April 1st, in fact, in a galaxy far, far away, another narrative was taking shape, bringing us a new language, a new set of words. Moonrise, Earthrise, Moonjoy. Okay, it was still our galaxy. I just wanted to say that. But it was April 1st. 4 NASA astronauts launched a new space mission toward the dark side of the moon. They called the mission Artemis 2, that Greek goddess, that warrior spirit, goddess of the hunt. Once that imminent threat of genocide against Iranians sunsetted on that day of April 7th, and I finally released my breath and released my shoulders after holding my breath for what had seemed like hours, I decided to change my posture. I decided to change my whole stance because it felt like a great time to maybe get myself off the earth and look skyward. Because these were the 4 human beings we needed at the time we needed them. They named their spacecraft Integrity. And I am walking a little lighter before you today because I have spent the last month listening and watching hours and hours of interviews with these 4 astronauts who have made integrity their watchword, their beacon, and their refuge to which they return. Can you imagine integrity at the heart of leadership once again? Integrity. So consider this your inspiration, your invitation to transform your stance from looking downward into the pits of moral hell, truly, and begin to look skyward, to learn more about this Artemis 2 mission, because this mission is exciting, y'all. This mission is filled with firsts. The Artemis 2 mission brought 4 astronauts farther from Earth than anyone has ever gone before. This was also NASA's first crewed launch to be overseen by a female launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson from the Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center. And it's really not just about the astronauts. If you look at the photographs of Mission Control, y'all, it is mostly women at Mission Control. That's mostly who is Houston this time around. Jeremy Hansen is not only the first Canadian to fly to the moon, but also the first non-American to do so. Christina Koch is the first woman to fly to the moon, and she has a number of other firsts under her belt as well. Victor Glover is the first person of color to fly to the moon. NASA did not accept minorities into its astronaut corps until 1978, 6 years after the last Apollo astronauts launched for the moon. You have to understand, when these last 2 historic astronaut firsts were announced on live television, the person who cheered the loudest with an immediate woo was white Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen. The pride he felt for his crewmates and for himself at being part of this crew was evident, and it shone through the moment. These 4 astronauts, all educated in public schools, it goes on and on, until college, they were media trained to meet the moment. Now, as a student and a practitioner of awe, being held captive by a daily news cycle that is really the polar opposite of awe. What's the polar opposite of awe? Maybe it's disgust or contempt, or a combination of disgust and contempt, yeah. My Unitarian Universalist faith calls me back to awe as a sacred faith practice, pulls me back to awe. I shared the awe that these astronauts expressed throughout their 10-day journey into space. And I also want to invite you into the awe and wonderment of a mission well executed and a story beautifully told. Now, if you want to experience a good cry, and it's going to be tough for me to actually get through this part, I invite you to nasa.gov to watch when the crew encounters a beautiful, unnamed crater filled with light on the boundary between the light side and the dark side of the moon. Astronaut Jeremy Hansen makes a request of Mission Control. His voice is shaking as he shares with Mission Control that this crew of astronauts have been working together and learning together for quite a few years. And in that time, he said, we have lost a loved one. He is referring to Commander Reed Wiseman's wife, Carol, who tragically died of cancer just a few years earlier in 2020. Tragic because she was young, but also because they had young children together. Hansen says to Mission Control, holding back tears as he speaks, "It is a bright spot on the moon, and we would like to call it Carol." And then the entire crew of 4 hug one another in zero gravity for a full minute, connecting with one another thousands of miles away from the rest of us, carrying that torch, that chalice maybe, of human connection and tenderness, carrying it inside of the deepest, darkest place of all, the universe. And then came Easter. Now, if you were looking down, scrolling at the Easter message from the American president, you would find yourself further dragged down lower than before, okay? I'm not going to repeat the words, actually. They're not appropriate for church. Lifting my posture, rising into my dignity, I did what the flowers and the plants were doing all around me, and I looked skyward towards the sun. Thankfully, the astronauts were ready to meet us right back as we gazed up. Victor Glover, the first black man to go to the moon, a scientist and a Christian, had an unscripted message for the Earth on Easter morning. This is what he said. Oh, and keep in mind, by the way, most people alive on the planet today were not alive when the Apollo mission touched down in 1972. And that was such a wonder-filled experience for people on Earth. It gave us all a sense of oneness. But that was that generation. Artemis 2 is now. It's the next generation of children and people who could be filled with wonder. Even one of my sons is now thinking about aeronautics as a career. He's interested in maybe being an astronaut one day, or maybe just mission control, or maybe just an engineer, he said, working on the equipment. But kids want to be in space again. So when I heard Glover's message, Victor Glover's message, I knew I wanted to preach about this Artemis 2 mission and help us refocus our stance skyward. So this is what he said on Easter morning. This is what Victor said. I don't have anything prepared, he began. I think these observances are important, and as we are so far from Earth and looking back at the beauty of creation, I think for me, one of the really important personal perspectives that I have up here is that I can really see Earth as one thing, he said. When I read the Bible and I look at all of the amazing things that were done for us, we who were created, you have this amazing place, this spaceship. You guys are talking to us because we're on a spaceship really far from Earth. But you're on a spaceship called Earth, that was created to give us a place to live in the universe, in the cosmos, Glover said. I think maybe the distance we are from you makes you think that what we're doing is special, but we're just the same distance from you. And I am trying to tell you, trust me, you are special. He continued, in all of this emptiness, this is a whole bunch of nothing, this thing we call the universe. You are this oasis. You have this beautiful place that we get to exist in together. I think as we go into Easter Sunday, says Glover, thinking about all the cultures around the world, whether you celebrate it or not, whether you believe in God or not, this is an opportunity for us to remember where we are, who we are, and that we are the same thing, and that we got to get through this together. Now that is a message for Easter. From the stars. Glover was miles from Earth, and he could see us so clearly. Glover was being impacted by what space philosopher Frank White coined the overview effect. Did you know that there is such a job as space philosopher? I didn't know it. The overview effect is the term for that experience of viewing the Earth from space and experiencing Earth as a unified whole without boundaries or borders. Now, living here on the surface of the Earth, we actually find that concept very hard to grasp, and even if we can grasp it, we find it difficult to hold on to in our minds. On the podcast, Houston, we have a podcast, Frank White explains the 3 elements of the overview effect. It is an effect, by the way, that is experienced and not explained. Zen masters will say, Zen is beyond words. And then they will begin to try and explain it. Just so you understand, the overview effect is like Zen. It is ultimately beyond words. But allow me to explain it. First, and most importantly, you experience the reality, the truth of no boundaries nor borders on Earth. If you have understood geography through maps and globes, you may experience surprise or even shock that there are no little lines of demarcation between countries, no actual visual separations between nations nor lands. Now, intellectually, we may know this, but the true effect of it, the truth of it, can only be experienced from space. The second aspect of the overview effect is the striking thinness of the atmosphere and the sense of our fragility, and that Earth is a whole system and that humans are merely one part of it. That is something that you can really only see with that overview effect. The third aspect of the overview effect is the immediate conclusion that the astronauts draw. We are really all in this together. Our fate is bound up with people who we think are different than ourselves. Ultimately, though, we are totally connected, not only with people, but also with life. Everything relates to everything else. Out of that is the realization of oneness, an ultimate interconnectedness, which is a deeply held value of Unitarian Universalism, our interconnected web of existence of which we are a part. Now, you could know this intellectually with your brain, but in the overview effect, you experience it with your eyes and also your heart, with the heart. Now, part of it is the Earth itself, and another part of it is seeing the Earth against the backdrop of the universe, that infinite darkness. And then part of the effect is that you start to understand that time is very earthbound. And so in space, time is more confusing, more of a concept. And then zero gravity also affects perceptions, shifting the perceptions that once kept you grounded. And so the experience of the overview effect, when time is now different, you're not on Earth, and you're not experiencing gravity, is completely transforming your perception of what is real and what is true. When she returned to Earth for her first big interview, the astronaut Christina Koch could hardly form words. She had experienced a profound connection with these 3 other astronauts. At one point, for 40 minutes, the moon was interfering, was in between them and the Earth. And so they experienced a planned loss of communication. I want to say one other thing that happened, by the way, if you don't know, that they also came together for a profound act of resistance. You know that President Trump called them and spoke to them, and they refused to respond. I try not to say that name, sorry, but you can see it was 14 minutes of non-responsive silence, and you can watch as they passed a little mic around and nobody would take it, and they just kept going, and then he finally just hung up. So at one point, for 40 minutes, the moon was between them, and so they experienced 40 minutes of loss of communication. They helped to keep each other safe and alive. They had worked together for years, bonding and planning to bring wonder, perspective, and hope to people across the globe. I mean, that was their mission, to bring integrity back into our view. So her crew, who had cared for her, kept her safe and uplifted, who each had their role on the mission and played it beautifully with care and preparation, that was what she had experienced. And so her first words to the public were this: a crew is people who are in it all the time, no matter what, that is moving together for the same purpose, willing to sacrifice for the other. A crew holds each other accountable, and a crew has the same needs for survival and is inescapably, beautifully, dutifully linked. When we saw tiny Earth, what struck me wasn't just Earth. It was all the blackness around it. Earth was just this lifeboat hanging undisturbed in the universe. And then she broke down, wordless, for a minute on the stage. I know I have not learned everything this journey has to teach me, but I have learned one thing. Planet Earth, you are a crew. Another one of the astronauts said, you spend your whole career, decades, preparing to leave the Earth, and then the minute you are out there in space, all you want is to be back home on Earth, connected with your family, your friends, and all of humanity surrounding you. You can imagine that, right? That longing to go up in space. Those of you who are my generation, I'll never forget that line from the film Space Camp. When she looks up as a child, she looks up at the stars and says, I want to go up. That longing from space then, that longing from space to be back home on planet Earth, surrounded by life. What a marvel. Frank White also discusses the underview effect, which is something he says deep sea explorers can experience about the great mysteries of life that are taking place in the darkest ocean underneath us all. But I thought it was time to coin a new phrase. I tried a couple of them out, and here's where I've landed. For those of us with the middle view, the middle view effect, wasn't it? That wasn't the term. I'm calling it the wonder view effect. Okay, does that work? The wonder view effect, okay. So does that make me a space philosopher now? I'm gonna ask Nathan. It's a practice, not an experience. I'm sorry, yes, it is. It is a practice. It is not an experience that we are able to hold on to through the mundanity of day-to-day living. I mean, you should try. I just think it's really hard to do. But can you, from the surface of Earth, without virtual reality simulations or space flights, hold in your heart all the time the truth of our human experience, which is that we are all one? Can you hold it? Imagine if more of us could live out our lives out of that secure knowledge. If more of us could spend some part of each day really understanding that borders and nations are not real. And in fact, they are so tiny as to fit inside the mind. This is the only place they're real. But on this pale blue dot, on this spaceship Earth, our survival is linked to the survival of everything. As Reverend Ian Hill said last Sunday, the heartbreak of the impact of environmental devastation, that's the doorway. On the other side of that doorway is not just faith, it is the truth. The truth of our oneness. Can we uplift our stance? Bring ourselves out of the depths, your eyes off of the scrolling, and take the wonder view of life. I'm talking about moments of awe that bring you back skyward or even eye to eye. The awe is everywhere once you start looking for it. It's cloud formations. Oh, I see an elephant. I see a train. It's telescope views of planets when your neighbor invites you over. Come see this. It's connecting the dots of stars on a clear night. Is that Orion's belt? It's the daytime moon. My children will never tire of noticing it. It's the culture of resistance popping up everywhere. Can you feel it? The loud resistors, the quiet resistors. It's the gardeners. It's the religious education teachers, the visionaries, the orchestra, the choir, the painter, the pleasure of bodies connecting. It is the truth. People of earth, we are all one.